Kia ora tātou, ko Rimataka te maunga, ko te awa kārengi te awa, no whakatiki aho. Ko Rimataka, sorry, ko whakatiki, no, I'm sorry, ko whakatiki, no aho, ko Weaver toku whānau, ko Andrew toku ingoa. My apologies for stumbling there. Welcome everybody to our first webinar of the year for Digital Identity New Zealand. My name is Andrew Weaver. I'm the Executive Director for Digital Identity New Zealand. And I do like to start these sessions with a wee pipiha, which tells you basically who I am, my mountain, my river, the area in which I live, and the beautiful Whanganui Aotearoa, Wellington region, and then my family. So we are going to kick this off. We have an awesome panel with us today, and we're going to be looking at thoughts on what's ahead of us for the next period of time with identity, with digital identity, with trust, and all of the matters associated with that. We do start these sessions with a karakia, and we finish as well. So let me share that with you now. I will be speaking the Māori version, which is the origin of the karakia, but the translation is here for you as well. So hopefully you can read that. Unahia te pou whirimarama, tomakia te ao whatu tangata. Tātai ki runga, tātai ki raro, tātai aho rao. Haumei, huie, taiki e. As I said, welcome to what we are doing. To give you a little bit of orientation, we've got a lot of activity going on within Digital Identity New Zealand at the moment. To encourage you to check out our website if you're interested in membership of Digital Identity or in any of the NZ Tech family, Tech Alliance family. There's some details here. We have a bunch of events which are on the website as well, so I encourage you to have a look at those, including one in particular which is proving very useful and popular, is a fortnightly coffee chat, which is basically a drop-in if you want to find out more about what we're doing or have a particular problem, challenge, issue that you would like to discuss or debate. It's a healthy discussion area. Also a preview, if you like, Tech Week is coming up at the end of May again this year. So submissions are open now if you're interested in hosting an event or partnering with event with others to run an event. So a lot of focus around that towards the end of May. And again, as I say, submissions are open for that now. Right, with that, we are going to get into the content matter for today. First of all, what we're going to do is we've got 4 panelists, each from quite different backgrounds and areas. Each of them is going to have an opportunity to sort of set the scene, a bit of a framework of what they see coming ahead of us, challenges, opportunities, as well as the things we really need to be careful about. And then we are going to have the opportunity after that to get into some Q&A. So in terms of how we're going to run that, we will primarily be using the Q&A function within Zoom. So that's one of your buttons down the bottom there. If you've got a question to ask, either to a particular panelist or to everybody that we can ask the panel, please pop it in there. If you've got some general commentary, just want to tautoko what someone says, or have a handy link to some interesting information or research, then please use the chat feature. So chat is there for the general discussion, if you like. If you've got a question, just so we know where it is, please pop it in the Q&A and we'll address it as we move through. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I have the pleasure of introducing our first panelist today, who is David Morrison. David's day job is with Internet New Zealand. He also happens to be the awesome chair of Digital Identity New Zealand. So my boss, it's great. He's a wonderful boss. So he's going to give us a bit of a chat about his perspectives, both as chair and also from his role as in Internet New Zealand. David, over to you.
Kia ora katoa. Welcome everyone, and yeah, really excited to sort of be here in the discussion this afternoon. My day role is as Commercial Director for Internet New Zealand, and really it's about helping diversify and strengthen the income for Internet New Zealand as a charitable organisation so that we can further and do more good. A key focus of our organisation is about helping New Zealanders harness the power of the internet, and a lot of the work that we do tends to shine through two key lenses of an internet for all and an internet for good. Those might mean slightly different things to different people, but generally they're relatively self-explanatory around creating an internet that is available and accessible to all folks within Aotearoa, and an internet for good, looking at ways in which we can amplify the good of the internet and minimise the harms that we see appearing from time to time. So that's a big part of our work. In terms of digital identity, I've got a team that are currently exploring the broad question of what Internet New Zealand's role should be with digital identity. And so we've been working through some experiments internally and currently working with some technologies. But what I wanted to do today was just sort of share, I guess, a perspective of the sorts of conversations that we've been having over the past year, and potentially provide a little bit of a nudge in terms of where I think those conversations need to translate to. So let me share my screen and we can get underway. So hopefully folks can see my giant pink screen now. Yep. On there. Awesome, thanks Andrew. So 2021, the year of identity. I think it's the year of identity. Every year is a year that relates to identity, and it's very much going to be a year that starts providing some pretty solid foundations for where we go over the coming years. And I'm sure Tony will talk a little bit more about the work the DIA is doing, which is going to be instrumental in, I guess, creating the platform and the place in which many of us will want to participate. So what I wanted to do is just talk about a few things. So one of the things that pops up a lot at the moment is a conversation around standards. So there's a lot of conversations around identity solutions needing to adhere to existing and emerging standards. I know there's a lot of excitement around the W3C emerging standards of DIDs, or decentralized identifiers, and verifiable credentials. And there's a lot of opportunity for doing some really cool stuff there. So standards embedded into technology is creating some really exciting and interesting places for people to play. But I wanted to counter that with this perspective of people. We need to make sure that we're constantly keeping people at the center of everything we're doing. What are the problems we're trying to solve? How do we actually make people's lives better with the work that we're doing? And how does this technology translate into something that's going to be loved and used by people day to day? So a lot of our conversations currently are very technology based, but just want to sort of hold out to the side there that, you know, ultimately we're here to make the world a better place, and that world is full of people. The other term which I have a really kind of strong reaction to is interoperable. So one of the drives for developing a standards-based approach to digital identity in Aotearoa is ensuring that different solutions can work together. Now, having something that's interoperable doesn't necessarily mean that it will interoperate. And I'd love us to change the word to be a little bit more specific. How do we make solutions that interoperate and work with each other? One of the risks I see in this emerging environment is the development of lots of really interesting digital identity solutions based on standards, but ultimately within very specific verticals that they're serving. And what that potentially could mean to the people that ultimately end up using our services is they end up with a whole bunch of different interfaces or apps or ways in which they can manage different aspects of their identity. So their identity potentially becomes a fragmented experience. And I think there's an opportunity and a challenge to the industry to really look beyond the particular vertical and look at ways in which we can operate and share our solutions across different platforms. And that's not an easy task, because ultimately there's a whole bunch of business cases and commercials that need to drive and ensure that these systems can sustain and maintain their operations in order to continue delivering value to folks in New Zealand. Trust. It's the key of everything we're doing around digital identity. And I see trust as an outcome of doing a whole bunch of things really, really well. And so I've got a few bullet points on this one. So privacy, near and dear to all of our hearts. If we get privacy right, we get control right, we give people control over their own data, their own information. We allow them to choose when and what they share with different interactions online. We're starting to build a platform for generating trust. Security is going to be really, really important. A lot of these solutions that we're building and developing, I've got a really strong focus on what one of my team called the happy path, you know, the ways in which these things are used to generate the value to which they're intended. But how do we protect against the sad paths or the scary paths, the ways in which these systems or tools could be misused? So we need to make sure that the work we do to put these things out into the wild is got an element of really strong, robust security testing and making sure that what we're putting out there, you know, is really robust in the real world. Education is another big one, and I think as we see a range of different identity solutions evolve and develop and get tested in the real world, we're going to see a whole lot of language being introduced to people in different contexts, and potentially not be using the same definitions, the same ways of applying different terms in identity. And there'll be different ways in which people perceive the things they're being told. So I think there's a really strong role, and in particular for DINS and for its members, to build a really consistent and enduring way in which we can educate people about what is digital identity, what are the components and the things that they really need to care about, so that when they see these digital identity systems coming their way, they've got a really good base of knowledge to make some good judgments about what it means for them and their data. And use cases. I use this term all the time, and it's you know, it's where we focus a lot of our efforts in terms of finding you know, a specific use case that allows us to really test the technologies that we're bringing together. And it's a really valid and discrete way for helping shape and focus our activity. But we need to do this in a much wider context. So we need to make sure that our systems are really usable. And again, one of my team, community product UX designer, loves this term of minimum lovable design. So we want systems and solutions that can be not only used by people, but really loved, you know, they actually really enjoy the experience. And that's going to be a challenge, because ultimately we're going to be working in a place where there is friction and interactions online. We need to make sure that all of our work that we do developing and building use cases is really inclusive. We need to develop for the full spectrum of different ways in which people can use these technologies. And that's a really important aspect that sometimes we lose sight of if we start focusing on a average user or a range of different types of people that fit with these use cases. We need to consider the diversity of use and the ways in which these can be used. And we also need to acknowledge the bicultural nature of our country and the journey that we're going on in this place. And I think there's a fantastic opportunity as we build and grow digital identity solutions that we really take time to do this well. I'm really early on in my own sort of bicultural journey, and I'd like to give a hat tip to Janelle, who's also on the Exec Council. That's really helped, along with a couple of other colleagues on the council, to help shape and direct Digital Identity's journey in a more bicultural kind of lens, and implementing and changing the way in which we think about how we do our work. And I think this needs to spread throughout the industry as well. And we need to make sure things are accessible. I'm incredibly fortunate to have 2 arms, 2 legs, relatively good eyesight, that hasn't gone yet. But not all folks have that, that level of privilege. And we need to make sure that the solutions that we build cater for all the different types of people that exist. And again, that's often really hard to do well, but we need to make sure that if we're going to build enduring systems and solutions, that we're doing it in a way that really encompasses the full range of all folks within Aotearoa. So those are probably the 4 kind of key words that I hear bubbling away in a lot of our conversations. And those that, and I just want, in the pink panes, just wanted to, I guess, provide just a little bit of a challenge to everyone in the industry, just to think a little bit beyond those to how does it actually impact and deliver real value to folks within Aotearoa. So I'll stop there and hand over back to Andrew, or see if there's any questions.
Kia ora, thank you, David, and appreciate the action-focused challenge and what you're bringing there. It's not just talking about the concepts, but it's thinking about how they actually hit the road when we're doing things. So really appreciate that. We haven't got any specific questions at the moment, but we will obviously have you back at the end when we open up for the panel. Wonderful, great. So the next speaker we are very privileged, very fortunate, and I'm sure she feels she is fortunate as well. Diane Joyce is on the International Executive of Women in Identity, a wonderful organisation if you haven't heard about it, and Diane will tell us a little bit about it as well. That we definitely encourage anyone who's involved with digital identity to be part of. Diane, as you will shortly find out, is a proud Kiwi, but spends a lot of her time in the UK. So, and is here also in the Wellington region at the moment. So, if feeling the love and relative freedoms, I'm sure. So Diane's been at this a long time. She's an expert in the industry. She's a trusted and a powerful voice as well. So really privileged to have you here, Diane, and we'd love to have your insights, not just from an international perspective, but also where you see things are applying in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Thanks, Andrew. Kia ora koutou. And it's absolutely amazing to be here. And I have to say, everything David talked about resonated with me entirely in our digital identity ecosystems. A little bit about me. Yes, I'm bilocated. I don't like winter, so I spend my time in Wellington and also in London. And I feel so fortunate to be here at the moment in a country that really has managed the pandemic in just such an amazing way. And when I talk to my colleagues and friends in London, it's an entirely different world. So I've worked in the digital identity and cyber industry for many years. I'm an innovator. I'm also a disruptor. I don't believe in the status quo. I believe we can always move forward. There are always things to do. I am a little bit of a technologist at heart. So, I'm committed to providing the users of digital services, not just identity services, with an experience that's built on security, convenience, and transparency. Anyone who knows me well will hear me often say, use the technology to take the heavy lifting off the user. Usability, number one. Users will never understand enough about the security, and we certainly have technology to do that. So I've worked in both the public and private sector organisations to set strategies for the standardisation and the way digital identities are assured, asserted, and used. I worked with the government, the UK government, and the gov.uk Verify program, both on the standards board, but also as the product owner of one of the identity providers, and definitely a disruptor in that particular field. I also established a pan-government community for digital identity, advising identity vendors and government organisations on how to achieve secure and scalable identity federation with interoperability between government departments. Often in the UK, they're siloed and isolated, and so that was quite an amazing thing to do. As Andrew said, I'm on the executive of Women and Identity. We're a not-for-profit organisation staffed entirely by volunteers, and we actively promote diversity and inclusion in the digital identity industry. We want to ensure that digital identity solutions are built for everyone and that they are built by everyone. So we're committed to diversity. We champion a more diverse workforce, inclusive of all, to enter, to work and advance in an identity industry. This is to reduce the bias and to ensure that we develop identity systems and solutions that work for all. Women in Identity are also a catalyst for change. We provide industry thought leadership, research, education around bias, diversity and inclusion, and its fundamental importance in the digital identity industry. We're also the creators of opportunity. So we create opportunities for more diverse representation across industry events. Diversity in relation to gender, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, social status. And we do this both as speakers, contributors, participants and attendees at events. You'll often see us speaking at events, and we do tend to speak on the topics of diversity and inclusion. And whilst our name states that we are women in identity, actually it was a bunch of women who in the identity industry who got together, and that's how we started. And what we wanted to do was shake up the identity industry. But to do that, we need to be inclusive. So everyone is welcome to join. And we have members of all genders. It's free to join us. You can go to www.womenandidentity.org and join. In fact, I'd love to see you all there. So for today, my view on the digital identity landscape is more from an international perspective of what I think the changes are going to happen in 2021 and 2022. If we look back at 2020, it's been a massive catalyst for change, with the move to online and technology being our primary methods of communicating and accessing services. And in that, never has digital identity been so important, but also to be found so wanting. The real downside of 2020 is that it's highlighted the extremes between those who have access to digital services and those who do not. And this, to me, is the number one thing that we need to address. So I think if I look at the trends for this year, I think number one, identity needs to become more mobile, more digital, but still usable across channels. A digital identity to me can be used in person, it can be used remotely, offline. It still has to be your digital identity. I think organisations will be designing for mobile first, and they'll be designing for journeys across multiple locations and devices. So maybe start something online and then go in store, maybe start something in store and then go online and finish it. And I think they'll also be designing for identities that can be used in both the private and public sectors. We've got to stop the silos. I think another trend towards the mobility is that government documents will start to become digital. And therefore, they will need a digital identity to access them. So many governments are already working on digital driver's licenses and passports. And now, of course, there's a big drive for the COVID passports. But without a digital identity to prove that I own this COVID passport, it's as good as a piece of paper that I've printed out of my printer. So I think there'll be a big focus on that. I think the second thing, which David touched on as well, is a hybrid model is going to arise between federation, centralised and decentralised identities. I think it is going to start to emerge in 2021, particularly around the data privacy that is required. Now, governments tend to favour either the centralised or federated approaches, and that makes sense. That's the infrastructure that they've got at the moment. They've got huge amounts of data that they can provide. But the technology and identity companies are leaning more towards decentralised identity and seeing that as a much better usability and privacy. So I think these are going to start to combine into an ecosystem where we will have some centralised, some federated, some decentralised, and it's really going to be about the use of attestations rather than data exchange. So I think that that's a big change that's coming. I think the third one is the one that I talked about dealing with exclusion. And the lack of access to online services and the lack of in-person facilities in 2020 and in the UK still in 2021 means people are falling by the wayside and they're no longer able to participate in society. And that's not okay. So I think we need a different model from the current model we've got, where identity tends to be based on a government trust anchor, a passport, a driver's license, a birth certificate, to a much more triangulated approach using multiple data sources, perhaps using vouching, using different ways of getting people on the digital identity journey. And I think it also gives a much richer picture of that person at the end of the day. So to do that, AML, KYC, identity checking, it's often the gateway to establishing a digital identity, and the regulations have to change in order to move away from this idea of a government trust anchor. And very much around the world, I do see that starting to happen. I think it's starting to happen here in New Zealand as well. The fourth thing is digital identity needs guaranteed trust and security. It's so fundamental that we can trust in the identities and that consumers can trust us with their data. So I think that will come about by improved trust frameworks with a public-private partnership and with a focus on data protection. I think the government has a big role in regulating trust frameworks, but I do not believe it should own and operate the trust frameworks. It must be more public-private partnership. I think as a result, we'll see more implementations of zero trust networks. And in the identity space, that's really key in getting decentralized identity and being able to share attestations. I think along with the trust and the security is the sharing of fraud signals across organizations. Now, the trust frameworks allow us to do that in a way that's consistent and that can be trusted. And I don't know whether you know, but Microsoft and Google both share signals on compromised email accounts. I think if those two giants can do it, most other organizations can as well. And interoperability, I did like what David had to say about that, because I think being able to interoperate is fundamental to this. And that doesn't mean that it's going to work everywhere, but the decentralized model starts to provide for this, and the trust frameworks need to be designed with this in mind. It has to be able to operate not just within New Zealand. I have a digital identity in Australia, I have one in the UK, and I have one in New Zealand. My data is shared across all of those and takes an awful lot of keeping up to date. It costs each government to do that. There's got to be a better model. So we need to be able to interoperate on a global scale, but fundamental to that is the public-private partnership. I think number 7 for me is privacy by design. I think it's becoming more prevalent in the digital identity systems and the trust frameworks. I'm all for the exchange of attestations rather than data. And I think the verifiable credentials as a standard and the decentralized identities is going to see that flourish in the next 18 months. Key reason? Organizations are now finding holding data is one of their highest risks, particularly with the amount of breaches and fines being imposed. In the EU, we've found that GDPR does have teeth and the fines are getting higher and higher. No longer do the organizations want these great data lakes where if they're breached, it costs them, a percentage of their total worldwide income. I think number 7 for me is an increase in unique Internet of Things, digital identities. At the moment, we're moving to a world where everything's connected, and my vacuum cleaner wants to connect to my network. Well, I don't know anything about my vacuum cleaner. So I think there's going to be a focus on privacy and security for all Internet of Things. It's also one of the areas in which breaches happen an awful lot for individuals less so for organisations, but it still does happen. So I think there's going to be a bit of a separation of networks between Internet of Things, people, and systems. And all of these Internet of Things devices need their own digital identity, so we know who they are, we can prove who they are, and give them the access they require. So I think finally, I think the need to deal with the increasing exclusion of people is so fundamental to us moving forward in 2021. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the demographic profiles that I see that leads to exclusion. I think the first profile is those who cannot meet the legal requirements to get access to digital services. And many groups, such as migrants, are unable to provide the documents they need by law, and they are unable to prove their identity in their place of residence. And without these, they cannot even access basic banking services, and that tends to be the starting point for digital inclusion. I think the second group of people are those who cannot afford the cost of digital services. And particularly in 2020, we found in the UK, there's an awful lot of people who aren't in the online world, who do rely on branch networks, and when they're all closed, they just fall by the wayside. So we're moving to an online world, and many financial institutions, many governments no longer have in-person premises, or in 2020, we saw they were restricting access to them. And the people need digital devices and internet access to get access to these services, and it's not possible for everyone. And that's something we very much need to address. So I was really interested in what David was saying about Internet New Zealand addressing that, and perhaps the UK can learn a bit from that. And then there are those who are on low incomes or live in low socioeconomic areas. They tend to be evaluated as high risk, and therefore often financial services are more expensive for them, and accessing online services is a lot more expensive for them. So we need to be able to help them as well. But number 3 is those with the lack of skills, ability, or means to access digital services. And this includes the vulnerable, who often live on the fringes of society. It also includes the illiterate, or those with physical and mental disabilities. In the UK, it also includes those who live in remote locations without the technology infrastructure, i.e. no mobile signals, no wireless, no internet. So whilst I described these groups of 3 people, and someone challenged me recently when I talked about these, I think these profiles exist whether it's in New Zealand, Africa, Europe, Asia, or the Americas. So I think this is the number 1 problem I would like to see the digital identity industry solve this year.
Wow.
I think it started.
I'm really glad that we are recording this session, and we will be making it available to everyone after, because you have packed a whole lot of insight and knowledge and wisdom in that, Diane, and some key challenges as well, and that particularly when it comes to the inclusiveness of design and the way in which we go about things. And you touched on some incredibly important points there, and concepts like the minimization of data flows through the proper use of technology. So yeah, some awesome material there, and I do encourage anyone with questions for Diane, please pop them in to the Q&A, and we'll come back and round out on some of these things as well. So thank you, Diane. Appreciate that, and we'll bring you back for the panel once we have our final 2, or actually 3 speakers, because now we get a 2-for-1. We have Tony Eyles from the DIA Digital Identity Transition Program, who is well known to most of you in his role as a key liaison person with that program. We also have the director of the program, Alan Bell, joining us as well. So gentlemen, across to you to give your take on what you see happening in this year ahead. A lot, given your program.
Thank you, Andrew. Kia ora koutou, ko Tony Eyles toko ingoa. Pleasure to be here today to talk to you. It's hard doing these webinars because you can't actually see who you're talking to, so you end up talking to a computer screen, which is kind of a weird experience. But I think I've probably met a lot of the folks on this call, and you'll be aware that we've been running a program here in the DIA and government to change the world. And I'm sitting here with Alan Bell, my director, so he's going to talk about where we're up to.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Andrew. I'll start with a few thank yous. I want to thank Diane for those challenges. There's quite a lot to do in a year. I think we'll all be very tired if we manage to get all of that done, but it's great to have some ambitious targets to try to work through. I want to thank David for his summary as well, but I want to give a special thanks to Andrew Weavers at this time. Special thanks to Andrew Weavers for the work that he's done and working with DINS and bringing forward such a dynamic group and facilitating it over the period of his leadership, his executive leadership. So it's really, I really appreciate that personally, and we've worked very well together. What I want to talk about this afternoon is just where the New Zealand government sits in this very important space. So having heard these previous speakers, what we can say that the New Zealand government is with you. We see the benefits that digital identity can provide across the economy, for society, for disadvantaged groups, for treaty partners. The list is endless. But it's breaking down the elephant into bite-sized chunks so that we can actually make tangible progress. I attend a lot of conferences, or I did pre-COVID, and a few on Zoom and other things, where we speak a lot about things, but what we're trying to do is actually shift the paradigm, shift the dial, and we are committed to doing that. So I just wanted to update you with the program and where we've got to. So last year, government made some critical decisions. One was that there'd be a New Zealand trust framework based on legislation. So work is continuing on that, and advice is going to ministers about what that trust framework should look like. We've also begun what we term as a draft rules program, where we are trying to work with public and private sector partners, stakeholders, to look at how the rules should be developed that would form part of that trust framework. That'll be an open and transparent process. DINS members will be involved in that, and we will be able to, make that information available as to where the rules for the function, how the trust framework will function once it's established in legislation, and what it would actually look like and require various participants within the trust framework to undertake. That work is progressing. There's a meeting actually today that I have to leave to go and attend, of the oversight group that's running that rules program. So that's exciting. The other major piece of work that we have on is a piece of advice that will go to government about ongoing government investment in digital identity services, including the future of RealMe. How do we modernize? How do we get it up to date? How do we also facilitate different approaches to digital identity? What would that look like? What are the risks? What are the pros? What are the cons? So that piece of advice will be going up shortly as well. So 2021 should see quite a lot of movement in digital identity. We recognize the value to the economy. We recognize the really great value potentially to treaty partners, but we've got to keep working together. We've got to, the great value, I think, from the private sector is along the lines of showing you sort of use cases, real pragmatic uses of digital identity, which is really, really important when we go and talk to decision makers, including ministers. And I'm very grateful for DINS for facilitating quite a lot of that stuff and working our way through. With that, I do hear the comments about GDPR, the comments about sharing data, the comments about greater attributes, and the comments that we've had from our previous speakers. We're aware of them all. We're very conscious of them all. We're conscious of digital exclusion. We're very concerned about that, and we're trying to find a way of tying all of that stuff up together. I'm not sure we can meet Diane's. We're going to solve it all in a year, but we're certainly going to give it a good bash. That's a quick summary of what we're doing at the minute. The program's poised in 2021 to sort of accelerate through and get some really crucial decisions and crucial progress going forward. With that, I'll hand over to Tony just to talk about some of the challenges ahead.
Sorry, Andrew. So one of the things that I see in this space is we've talked a lot about the problems, we've talked a lot about the ways in which we could work together better to go forward, etc., etc. But it's a very slow-moving beast, and I think for us to make real progress here, we've got to start mobilising the marketplace. RealMe has struggled for a long time with a two-sided market, trying to have people verified and have organisations accept that verification, and both sides just move very, very slowly. So if we're to really make this work much more quickly, it needs to be a full court press. The whole ecosystem needs to be mobilising along the same direction. And so to help affect that, while we get the system settings in place through the course of this year and beyond, I'd like to see us starting to move on what we call use cases, but they're actually problems to be solved and opportunities to be pursued that are all aligned in direction. And we're working with a number of agencies across a number of sectors to solve problems that they own or opportunities that they need to pursue right now, but doing so in a way that's aligned with the general direction of travel for the ecosystem and the principles that we have in place for the trust framework. So those sectors are really diverse, from health through to primary industries, and the benefits that are apparent in each of those vary from productivity, security, personal convenience, through to revenue uplift or access to international markets. Some really important outcomes that we're seeking. The year ahead is not without its challenges, however, as we appreciate. There was in the news today about the government debt, $100 billion right now. It's unprecedented. That's a constraint. It will be a constraint going forward. At the same time, we're needing to effect recovery from the pandemic and ongoing resilience. So change is required, not just the changes that we've been talking about for a few years now in order to make the consented information sharing easier for people, but change that's required for us to get moving again, for people to switch careers, for people to learn new talents, for people to operate remotely in ways that convey trust and confidence so that they can get on. There's more and more people now living in small towns, rural New Zealand, disconnected from their traditional communities and disconnected from their customers or their employers. So remote that's sort of made the business case for us. Don't let a good crisis go to waste, as they say. So we're gonna try and make the most of that within these constraints. It's massive, ambitious transformation, but we need to start getting the ball rolling with, I believe, through some of these use cases that can help prove concepts, solve problems, and get people thinking about a new approach. I think that was all I wanted to say.
Wonderful.
Andrew, to you.
Thank you. Thank you both, and excuse the truck going past. One of the challenges of being remote. Thank you, Tony and Alan, and appreciate your comments as well, Alan, at the beginning, and reflecting those back on you and your team. You really do need to be commended for the inclusive way that you have managed the work of the program to date, listening to the challenges that are presented to you, and really going after some of those key gnarly problems which are so challenging to address. So yeah, you have done and continue to do some really powerful work, and we're looking forward to the next stages of it as well. Now, our last panelist today is Janelle Riki-Waaka. She works with Core Education as part of our Executive Council for Digital Identity New Zealand. A really important part of our Executive Council. She often, and the most, it's quite amazing. Janelle has a gift. She's one of the most welcoming, engaging, lovely people that you can interact with. And with a beautiful smile and love in her heart, she will challenge you to your core. And that's a good thing, a really good thing. She has done a lot to help inform our work, and particularly around some of these themes which we have been already discussing in terms of exclusion, in terms of minimisation of harm, in terms of making sure we've got everybody involved. She brings a particular lens of te tiriti to the table as well. And there are some important aspects of that in the conversation as we move forward too. So Janelle, I will give you the stage.
Oh, tēnā koe, Andrew. Kia koutou ngā kai kōrero tēnei rā, tēnā koutou, kia koutou katoa I te ruma. Tēnā koutou, ko wai au, he uri tēnei no tainui waka, no whaingaroa ahau, engare e Pākiki ana au ki o tautahi, e noho tonu au ki o tautahi I raro I te haukainga I konei. He mihi ka tika kia rātou, ko Janelle Riki-Waaka tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone, really lovely to be here, and thank you so much for your kind introduction, Andrew. And yes, I sort of make jokes with people about how I like to make people uncomfortable, but I always like to do it with love and with the support that comes with that. So yes, if I do make you uncomfortable today, then that's a good thing. I'm going to feel pretty good about that. But I hope that I do pose perhaps some interesting and challenging questions for consideration. I made a scribe of notes as I was listening to our amazing previous speakers, and I was thinking a great deal about some of the keywords that were jumping out. So I kept hearing diversity and equity quite a lot, and that makes my heart really happy, because I think we probably all, if we're going to work in this space, need to have an equity agenda. And I guess I was just thinking about it from a bicultural perspective, you know, from a woman's perspective who happens to be Indigenous and Māori and lives here in Aotearoa. What does that look like, and what does that mean for me and for the communities that I serve? And I think if we're going to talk about how we are going to seek out, develop, design digital identity solutions for diverse communities, then the very first question we have to ask ourselves is, have we got the right people in the room to even start that conversation? Because particularly here in Aotearoa, we 100% are going to need to have have Māori alongside us in order to just navigate the tikanga that comes with a kaupapa-like identity, because the worldview of what identity is, what it means, how it can be, how it presents itself, and how we can connect to it is vastly different from an Indigenous perspective than it is from a dominant worldview perspective. So we have to have the right people around the table from the outset. And from what I mean by at the outset is a very common saying from a local hapu down here is nothing about us without us. And what they mean by that is, if it's going to impact us, we need to be at the table. And they need to be at the table when the piece of paper is blank. There is absolutely no point in taking something half designed or something already in draft and asking for feedback. That's actually consultation, and it's not engagement, because genuine equitable engagement means that all interested stakeholders and parties will be at the table when the paper is blank, before any decisions are made, before anything's drafted. And true collaboration comes about, I think, when you get all the right minds in the room, and they impact the solutions that you might even draft up in the first instance. So we really need to be thinking about getting the right people around the table. And I think if we are going to talk about the Aotearoa perspective, we need to have a think about the Indigenous people of this place, who are Māori. And we need to actually really recognise the history of Māori here in Aotearoa. So what we know, and what is fact, historical fact, is that there has been a systematic decimation of identity for Māori, and it was quite deliberate. It was done before us, so no one needs to take that on as a personal attack on themselves, but it was certainly quite deliberate. We wrote it into law. We put things in place through education, through policy and through procedure that were absolutely and openly intended to assimilate Māori people into the dominant culture. And so if we know and recognise that that's a historical landscape for the Indigenous people of Aotearoa, then we understand that the impacts of that will still very much be felt. Those intergenerational traumas have been passed down. What that might mean, and I can't speak for all Māori, but I can certainly speak for myself and my whānau, what that might mean is that we are quite understandably a little bit mistrusting of other people making decisions regarding identity on our behalf. We are and have been for some time in a fight, in a staunch fight to reclaim our identity, to ensure our kids are connected to that identity, and to protect and preserve that identity for future generations, for our moko, for our kids that will come and our grandchildren that will come after that. And so it stands to reason that there's a lot of feelings surrounding the kaupapa of identity for Māori. There's some trauma associated with it. There is a sense of mistrust of others making decisions about identity on our behalf. And there is highly likely not necessarily going to be running up to the table to have a conversation. So those of you involved in identity solutions are really genuinely going to have to just start at relationships and building trust before you even get to co-design a digital solution that will work for Indigenous people. You're really going to have to do the work up front on those relationships to establish a place of trust. And that was a real key word I heard coming through today. In fact, it's on the name of the framework, right? Trust framework. So what is that going to require? What is it going to require to just get the trust established that we're going to need in order to be able to carry out these solutions effectively for everybody? Māori won't want to relinquish any part of the struggle we've had. So they are going to hold on to what we have already claimed in terms of identity, and you're going to have to navigate that quite carefully. And I think the other part of that is understanding that if we're going to have an equity agenda, and if all of us are going to have an equity agenda, that doesn't by any stretch of the imagination mean the same for everyone. So I think we'd probably all agree we cannot just develop a solution that will work for everyone. It means understanding the actual diverse needs of each of those diverse communities, and then responding to those needs as they present themselves. And one of the things that is going to be really important for those involved in making decisions and co-designing digital identity solutions is that they are really mindful not to make decisions on behalf of Māori, because whether we like it or not, that won't work, and it hasn't worked. In fact, we can look across all systems in our country over a very long history of initiatives, of policies, of programs, of solutions that have been developed by non-Māori for the betterment of Māori, or in their best interest. And very rarely do they work because we weren't there. We weren't there to co-design them. So there is a growing movement amongst all organisations really in Aotearoa that we start to find solutions that are developed by Māori for Māori. And when it comes to our greatest taonga, our identity, then that's going to need to be a absolute non-negotiable. And that means you might need to start thinking about how you're going to navigate that space, because that is non-negotiable. We cannot have non-Māori communities, organisations making decisions on our behalf about our identity again, because that didn't go so well for us. So we're still dealing with that trauma, and it's really important that we know and understand that. I think the other part that's really important for us to, and this requires a lot of bravery, and we're really going to have to dig deep within ourselves as people and as organisations, around understanding that our own perception of what identity is, but also our own perception of words like equity and diversity, equity, identity are absolutely viewed and created through our own worldview, through our own lived experience, through our own bias, through our own privilege, all of those things that we cannot strip away from ourselves, that they are inherently within us. But recognizing that might be the case is going to actually stand us in really good stead for genuinely hearing and engaging with those around us. But it's tricky. It's really tricky. So that's going to have to be, you know, checking your bias at the door and continuing to check your bias and go, gosh, is that right? Or is that just what I think it is? Because that's my worldview, that's my lived experience. And creating trusting environments where you can check each other in that space is going to be hugely important. The last thing I guess I wanted to just chat about is the diversity of Māori, and there are some truths for Māori as a people, but actually Māori are just as diverse as non-Māori. So that each iwi, each hapu, each whānau will have its own very strong opinions and own lived experiences and own tikanga and kawa associated with being Māori in that community, and that could be vastly different from being Māori in another community. So universal decisions you know, may not work for all Māori, and it may mean, I guess what I'm getting to here is the recommendation is that you start in your own backyard, and maybe, you know, how might we consider regional solutions that are going to meet the needs of this immediate community that we live in, and could be considered wider past there, but how might we meet the needs of those in front of us first, and what is that going to require in terms of the relationships we might need to establish? I guess I'll just finish by saying that what I have been continually inspired by is those involved in digital identity solutions. Their heart has and their agendas have always been centered around a mindfulness of Māori and tangata whenua here in Aotearoa. And that's amazing and has continued to inspire me since I've been involved in DINS and some other organisations. And I guess what I would suggest is that we need to take that mindfulness to another level now. It needs to be more than just being mindful of, and now we actually need to create a space at the table and know and understand that some of these decisions cannot be made without them at the table, or they won't work. They will not deliver on our equity agenda, and they certainly won't deliver on our agenda for diversity. Exploring, I guess, identity, reclaiming identity, what identity means is actually what we've done as people for a long, long time. So the expertise already lives in us and has done for some time. We've been navigating the kaupapa of identity solutions for a long time, maybe not with the digital in front, but we've certainly, Indigenous peoples are old peoples internationally. So this is a kaupapa we may have some expertise in navigating, and we want to be seated at the table. So that would be my final comment, is just checking, I guess, and asking yourself that question, wait a minute, whose voice is missing? Whose voice is missing from this conversation, and how might we ensure we offer tangata whenua a seat at the table? So appreciate your time today. Appreciate you allowing me to challenge you with love and support, and ngā mihi nui.
Always inspiring and challenging, Janelle. Thank you. Just a reflection, I think as well, is you're talking about ensuring that Māori have an equitable seat at the table. I think you touched on, just as you were finishing there, there's some incredible ancient wisdom sitting there. That the concepts of whakapapa, the concept of identity being taonga, identity is taonga. That is an incredibly powerful concept, not just for Māori. There are lessons there for everybody. And again, not just for marginalised communities, for all communities. There's some real power in that. Hey, we're going to ask everyone to come back on video now. So Janelle, you stay where you are. Diane, David, Tony, and Alan, if you come back on. That has been an incredible conversation and opening to what we're talking about. We do have some questions, but one of the key ones, I think a very powerful theme which has been threaded through this is the inclusivity side of things. Diane mentioned trust anchors as a mechanism or a means of not just gaining critical mass, but something which allows us to, a cornerstone which allows us to move forward and actually build an ecosystem around. Tony, you mentioned the enablement, the regional approach, and how the game changer, in your perspective, the words what you were talking about is a game changer in terms of the remoteness and thinking about people in their regions. Janelle, you've talked about exactly the same thing in terms of how to interact and how to build trust in the first place. We've got an awesome quote here from Jax. Thank you for it. I'm going to use it. And it says that everything moves at the speed of trust. It's a really powerful statement. And David, you opened us up talking about the actionable nature of what we're doing and really being true to the inclusiveness. So when it comes to, I guess, that question of the trust anchor, using that as something perhaps we can have a little conversation about, what are your reflections as to how we go about doing that? Who are the people, what is this table we're talking about, and who are the people that need to be around it? David, what are your thoughts?
I knew you were gunning for me. I think it's this whole spectrum of digital identity needs to be tackled in bite-sized pieces. So it's about getting really specific about a problem that we're looking to solve, as Tony mentioned earlier. But then when we've got that problem identified, we make sure that we've got all of the right folks involved at the outset as we start exploring that specific problem. So, you know, there's been talk of, you know, exploring particular use cases, etc. So I think as organizations or different consortiums or groups or experiments that are running, as people pick a use case or a problem to solve, don't just focus on the problem, focus on all of the people that are that need to be present throughout the journey of creating, deploying, and using you know, a particular solution. We will see digital identity grow in slices over time. It will. We're not going to see a big bang of, you know, a big silver bullet that solves everybody's problems. We're far too diverse. Our use cases are too diverse. So I think we're going to see these build up in little bite-sized pieces. And I really like Janelle's call out to, you know, perhaps tackle a community need rather than a nationwide need. And so, but you want to do that in such a way that once you've solved it for a community, you can then scale it a bit further. but you need to ensure that as you do that, you're bringing new people into the mix and to the table as part of that. Hopefully that answers.
Thank you, David. Diane, interested in your views, particularly given some of the challenges and speed bumps, I guess, that, for instance, the UK have experienced in this. What would your advice be to us sitting here?
I think the advice is exactly as Janelle says. First of all, identify who needs to be at the table. And then also, I think, as David says, take it down to bite-sized chunks. Now, I think when we talk about identity systems being inclusive of everyone, this is, to me, where the whole idea of decentralized identity comes in. We don't design one great big identity system and say everyone's going to use it and going to be able to interact with it. What we do is we have a trust framework that describes the rules for interacting within different identity systems. I think very much in the past, federated identity has been a whole set of rules and everyone has to implement them as they are. But actually, I think the new identity space is more hybrid model where I really like what Janelle said. If you started with a community and you built something for them, that doesn't mean the next community is going to be able to use that. And, you know, I come from the UK where I'm not quite sure where Indigenous starts and finishes now because we have such a multicultural society there. And very much everyone has their own social ways of interacting. So I like the idea of the use cases maybe being then split down into targeted at groups of people and absolutely have them at the table. You can't develop identity services for people and then tell them they're going to use them. They have to have the input to it. So I think very much break it down and think more about a decentralized approach where you're able to interoperate with others using whatever works for you. So that would be my thoughts on this. And the UK's got a massive problem there because we have 70 million people, you know, many different cultures, many different languages, many different customs and how people consider their identity from, you know, we still have in the UK, in some communities, girls don't have an identity. They still don't get registered at birth. So, you know, one size fits all doesn't work. But I do believe we can put a space together where trust frameworks, I think, are a really good example of how everyone cooperates with each other and understands the trust that's instilled. But it's not a way of saying you will all do it the same way.
And that, I guess, Tony, coming to you, I guess describes your key challenge and how grey your hair has gone over the last 2 years. The government's role is clearly a pivotal one, but also one where, if I'm reflecting on how you operate, it's not where you're coming up with the answers for everyone. It's creating an environment where the answers can be developed. So in terms of that challenge, I guess, what are your thoughts on what can we do as a community to be working with you? You've got a key facilitation role in this. What's going to help you most?
Well, thank you, Andrew. I think we've taken pains to collaborate from the beginning of this program, as we know. And when it comes to the trust framework, which we think is critical, as people seem to agree, we're working with Māori in terms of what Māori require from a trust framework, how it ought to work for them, leave a space for them to design within. We're also mindful when it comes to the big transactional agencies delivering services to people in New Zealand, that we don't just design high-end smartphone-based solutions for the digitally privileged. You know, these big agencies in the social sector and in health and others need to service everybody. And so in almost the same breath, we have those conversations about cool new things. We need to talk about how we're going to not leave behind the digitally excluded and how can we build bridges to the digitally underprivileged. And there are some really interesting initiatives in place in different parts of government using, for example, trusted agents, trusted by the communities, that is, as channels who are already helping people navigate systems and get on board with processes, have the confidence and to be able to trust those processes. There's a number of other barriers to inclusion to address, like resource availability, motivation, skills. It's not always just about the technology. But those working within those communities where there's that closeness, that empathy and understanding and trust will be key for delivering those services. So we've yet worked out how to do it, but that's sort of part of the process. Cool.
Thanks, Tony. And Janelle, I guess you kicked off a bit of this. I'm fascinated. One of the aspects of whakapapa which really interests me is the way in which an iwi or even a hapu identifies who belongs, who's part of that, who's part of this community. And there's potentially a lesson for us in that, or even an opportunity perhaps, in terms of the way in which we design things. Be interested in your thoughts on that, perhaps expound a little bit on what that looks like to someone who's not familiar with Te Ao Māori.
Kia ora, Andrew. Yeah, so I mean, whakapapa is generally translated as genealogy, and it is, but it's more than that, because from a Māori worldview, something like wairua, which is often translated as a soul, but again, that's not necessarily the right translation, but wairua lives in all living things. So whakapapa connections can be to maunga, to mountains, and to awa, and to environmental aspects. So we actually descend from our environment in so many ways. In Atua Māori, we're often gods of environmental realms. If you think about those stories of Rangi and Papa in the beginning, our whakapapa and our identity lives in the environment, which helps to, I guess, begin to get our head around Māori's connection with the land, and also helps us to understand a term like tangata whenua, or people of the land, as descendants of the land. So whakapapa is quite a complex Māori concept, but in essence, whakapapa isn't just about bloodlines, it's about whānau groups and connections, and they can change and develop over time. So iwitanga or haputanga is a very real thing, and Māori pre-colonisation lived in their own independent little sovereign nations. So Ngai Tūhoi and Ngai Tahu down here in the South Island could be as different as Tonga and Samoa, or Tonga and France, actually, for that matter. They lived for many generations as independent nations, and the word Māori was a collective noun that happened post-colonisation, that was given to group all people of hapu together under one banner. They didn't necessarily see themselves as one people. They lived in these independent nations, and that very concept, just getting your head around that, means diversity changes to a whole nother level. When you're talking about Indigenous people, they can be as different as Tonga and France from hapu to hapu, which is, I loved Diane coming back to that regional approach. So how do we just start with the people around us, our whānau, our wider whānau, and these people that live around us? What are their needs? How might I solve that challenge? How can we work alongside them to solve that challenge? And then chatting to the next community, and hey, here's something we tried. What do you like about that? What do you don't like? You know, what will work? What might not work? What would need to be different for this to work for you? And I really, the last thing, I just want to pick up on the comment about digitally excluded. And, you know, as a Māori woman, mum in the room, every time I hear that, I feel so sad, because I know that our Indigenous peoples are so overrepresented in that space. So it feels like another whammy for us. It's like, oh man, yeah, heaps of us are in there as well. So there is there's a lot of work to do, and there's people like myself and others who are sleeves rolled up. Like, we're like, yeah, get us at the table. I'm really keen to chat about these solutions and how we might co-design them. So yeah, kia ora.
Perfect, thank you. There's a related question. I'm conscious of our time because it's gone very quickly. Paul has asked a question about skill shortage. So clearly there is a tech skills shortage if anyone in tech is not aware. I guess highlighted by challenges with COVID and the inability to bring in expert personnel from overseas. But then by the same token, what we're talking about is developing a more inclusive teams in terms of who develops the solutions. So who's actually doing the coding? That appears to be an opportunity, I guess. So what are your thoughts on what we need to do to actually make that a reality? Diane, probably start with you in that respect.
I think that's a really interesting challenge, because I don't know that there is a tech shortage. I think there's a shortage of people who think about things from a user perspective, who think about, the technology generally can get programmers, in the UK, there's a lot of offshore programming done in Poland and India and various places. But I think what we're missing more is the people who come at this from a perspective of, there's a reason we're doing this and that it has to be usable. So it's really interesting, because in the UK, I wouldn't say there's a tech shortage, because we offshore. You don't have to be in the same place. And I think very much in COVID, I'm in New Zealand, but I'm still doing some work with startup companies, and I don't think we have learned that people don't need to be in place. And I think there are so many people these days who are learning technology. I am really seeing the leadership, the visionaries missing from our industry more. And I love what Janelle was talking about is, where are the visionaries from the marginalized groups? Where are these people who are going to come and talk? I head up speaking for women and identity, and honestly, I really struggle to get people who I think have a fabulous point of view to stand up and talk. So I think that's more what we need. The technology, frankly, I think anyone can code it once you explain to them what it is, but visionaries are missing in my mind. Doesn't answer the question, but I think technology is not the issue.
Any other thoughts on that in terms of inclusion? David, I know it's a key part of Internet New Zealand's work.
Yeah, I think the Tautaku, Diane's perspective, though, quite a lot in terms of the getting specific technology skills generally can be done. The diversity of those skills, I think, is the challenge. If I think about, diversity in development teams, while you can get anyone to code things, I think it's still important to have full diversity across the breadth of all of your different skill levels and the different ways in which people are interacting with, building or designing things. So, so I think you still need to strive for, full diversity, throughout your teams, regardless of where they're at. And I'll admit, we struggle to find sometimes specific developer skills for what we're after. I've got a team now that's, so I've got 3 developers, 2 here in New Zealand and 1 based in Brazil, because of just the specific, we had a very specific skill set we're after, and we found someone who absolutely nailed what we were after. But in the space of digital identity, though, there's a whole bunch of, I think, emerging concepts and technologies and standards. And what that means is we actually won't be able to find folks that are, truly, deep in, decades of experience of dealing with verifiable credentials or zero knowledge proofs or, decentralized identifiers. This is stuff that we're all learning together. So I think the opportunity for us is to go, well, how do we ensure that as we're growing the capabilities of our teams, that we're ensuring that our teams are diverse, but we're also taking everybody on that kind of learning journey as well. So because it's going to be hard to find people that are digital identity specialists. And maybe it's our role to develop those and to develop a really well-rounded group of people that have those skills. So I don't have an answer, more probably just a challenge.
It has. Janelle, I know you've been involved in some forums talking about representing Māori in tech and development of talent as well. Interested in your perspective here too.
So many, could be another webinar, but you know, a couple of things. You know, in my really early days of understanding how tech works, I remember going to our IT project lead and buzzing in his ear like a buzzy bee, saying, "We need Māori coders," and he kept trying to explain to me, well, code is code, it's a language. And he was like, you know, it's not necessarily that we need Māori coders because, and I would try to get my head around it, but what I came to realize is actually we need Māori dreamers and Māori designers, because I agree with what Diane's saying. We can get anyone to code something if we tell them to code it or develop it, but actually it's the design and the co-design at the very beginning that needs that diverse worldview, because the rest is build, you know, and that can happen in many ways. If it's been designed well, anybody could code and develop. So I think we need some more dreamers and some more designers at the top. That's what needs to be diverse. But one thing I will say is I get a lot of people who'll say to me, you know, we need more diversity in tech. We need more diversity in tech, and we want more Māori, and we want more people of Pacific descent, and more girls. And how do we get them to come to my company, to come and work here and see this as a desirable job prospect? And my answer to that is, don't think for 1 second they don't. In fact, making an assumption that we don't see it as a viable job is silly. It's actually really offensive in some ways, because of course we know that there's money to be made, there's heaps of jobs, of course our kids want to go into that work, but the bigger question is, why would they work for you? What kind of space are you creating in your work environment that means diverse people are banging down the door to say, we want to work there because that looks like a place for me. That looks like somewhere where I'm going to be looked after and I'm going to be growing, and my diversity is going to be seen as an asset. So a lot of these companies that are screaming for diversity need to kind of do this and start looking inward and saying, how are we attracting more Māori, more women, more diverse populations to our work, because it's not going to happen by itself. There might need to be some growth in that space.
Exactly. And thank you. That's a really cool answer, really good answer in terms of what we're doing. We need to look inward. So it's not just inviting people to the table, it's actually making our table inviting, or actually getting rid of the table in some cases because you don't need one. Hey, we're almost out of time. I'm wanting to give everyone on the panel an opportunity, but perhaps a 30-second summary or takeaways, if you like, based on what we've been talking about today and based on what you know is coming. Tony, I'm going to put you on the spot first, if you don't mind.
Cool. Thank you. Kia ora, Andrew. I think I'm excited about this year. I think this was a lot of momentum building for change in this space in New Zealand. And I think New Zealand has an awesome opportunity to, perhaps move ahead of other nations. We're small. We've got a good relationship, government and private, very collaborative, kind of particularly in this area. It seems to be really, really, really good in terms of how we're supporting each other. We're on the same page. We've got a nation that's happy to adopt new things, and I really hope that this year we'll start to see change start to be affected in delivery of new things into the market, which actually allow people to enjoy a better environment for digital identity, rather than just talking about it. Let's get that momentum and start seeing it translated into practical action.
Nice.
Thank you.
Janelle, I'm going to go to you for a 30-second takeaway.
Just a huge you know, despite all the challenges I've thrown out, I just want to say a big mihi to all of you, because you're in there and you're doing the work, and it's really, really evident that you're asking yourselves those questions and you're really navigating things like equity and diversity. The fact that this is a kaupapa for our kōrero is hugely inspiring to me, and it shows the journey we've been on. And I guess it's just about not resting on our laurels now, just understanding that there's more steps to be taken, there's more conversations to be had, because we want to do this right, and we don't want any harm to happen during the process of this. So let's have those conversations and just keep innovating. So really inspired, and thank you for having me here today.
Perfect, thank you. Diane.
Janelle just stole everything I was going to say, so that's really easy. But also, I think collaboration, I think that is the answer to all of this. I mean, if you look at all of us, we have similar thoughts on the outcome, and the collaboration comes from having the right people at the table, the right sort of education, and let's move away from these big identity systems into more decentralized for the communities that they're working for. So, but thank you, that's been really informative, and what a great bunch of people.
Thank you, Diane. David, we'll leave you with the final words.
What's left? I think I just love the kōrero from everyone. I think it's been a really thought-provoking, and probably one of the takeaways I'd like to leave with folks is one of transparency. So as in order to collaborate and to work with others, I think we need to be vulnerable and open up and share the work that we're doing. I know there's lots of work going on in this digital identity ecosystem. There's lots of folks doing stuff, but it's not visible. There's a whole bunch of folks that are going, hey, I want to participate. I want to engage with people. I've got technology stuff. I'd like to try and find ways to help. How do we find ways to connect people? And I think a big part of that's building some transparency in terms of folks going, hey, we're exploring this area. We're really keen to find ways to engage others and try different experiments, etc. So, and for some that will be quite a challenging concept, particularly if folks are coming from quite a commercial oriented model, where these things need to pay for themselves. Transparency creates risk in terms of, but I think the benefits will, and the good that will come from that can only be enable much better, more well-rounded solutions.
Perfect. It's a good challenge. We are 1 minute away from the end of our webinar, which is perfect timing, really. So I'm going to finish as we started with our karakia, and just calling out the English words here, because it's talking about from confusion coming understanding, understanding coming unity, being interwoven, being interconnected, being together as one. It's really apt for the very conversation we've just been having. Onihia te pau whirimarama, tomakia te ao whatu tangata, tātai ki runga, tātai ki raro, tātai ahurao, home hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora, thank you all.